Hi, does this sound like you? You are in your 50s, you work hard, you've got kids, you've got a busy social life, and so by every measure you appear to be absolutely fine and probably successful, except you're waking up every night with a feeling that you just can't name. It's not panic, it's not sadness, it's just this low constant hum of something being wrong, something not quite right. But you don't know how to describe it because you don't know what to say, and nothing's actually happened that you think is that bad to be causing this feeling. So if that sounds familiar, then this video is for you. It's a video you probably didn't know you needed to watch. I'm Tom Phillips. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist and I specialize in working with anxiety in Generation X. And over the past several years, I've noticed when working with my clients that there is a pattern or several patterns that have been forming. My clients are not in crisis, they haven't had a breakdown, they don't believe they've had any particular kind of trauma. They're functioning, and often functioning at a really high level. But underneath that functionality, something has quietly been accumulating for decades. And it's in midlife when that thing finally starts to make a noise. So for those of us that were born between 1965 and 1980, Generation X, we are the generation that the media forgot. It's too busy writing about Gen Z's anxiety and millennial burnout to notice that we've been quietly struggling for a long time in a way that nobody is really discussing. And I want to change all of that. So in this video, I'm going to tell you what's actually happening, why it's happening now, why you're noticing it more than ever, and what you can do about it actually starting from today. Let's start with something that might surprise you. So whilst all the headlines focus on younger generations and mental health, research also tells us a different story about Generation X. For example, in 2025, a study found that 62% of all Gen Xers experienced significant childhood adversity, and that includes things like divorce, neglect, economic instability, absent parents, and yet of that 62%, only a small fraction have ever tried to address that therapeutically. We were the latchkey kids. We came home to empty houses, we had to figure out for ourselves, and we were proud of that, and rightly so. But here's what the science is telling us now. That unprocessed childhood adversity doesn't disappear. It goes underground and it gets stored in our nervous systems, in the body, in patterns of thought, patterns of behavior that feel completely normal because they've always been there. And then in our 40s, in our 50s, something changes, something shifts. Maybe it's because our kids leave home, maybe it's because our parents are ill or dying or they've died. Maybe it's a health scare or a job change or simply arriving at a milestone birthday and you realize that something feels off. And whatever the trigger is, the accumulated weight of decades of unprocessed experience suddenly becomes that much harder to carry. And because we're Generation X, we don't ask for help. We've got alternative ways of coping. We reach for a glass of wine, we work longer hours, we make dark jokes, and we tell ourselves that everyone feels like this is normal. And there are three aspects of this quiet crisis that I really want to discuss and name them more clearly. The first is what we call inherited emotional suppression. We didn't learn to talk about feelings and emotions. We learned to manage them, to push through, to get on with it. And there is lots of research that shows that Generation X is 3 times less likely than the millennial generation to seek help for mental health issues or mental health challenges. Not because we're any less affected, but because we were raised to believe that needing help equaled weakness. And that belief is still running in the background for so many of us. And it's quietly sabotaging our well-being and has been for so many years. The second point that I want to highlight is what we call identity erosion. So in midlife, the structures that gave us our sense of self, things like our career, parenting, physical capability, all starts to shift. The career that defined you for the last 20 to 30 years suddenly starts to feel hollow, or it's changed significantly because of things like AI. The children who needed you have become adults and independent, and that body that felt so reliable is now sending us new signals. Gen X, who were raised to derive their feeling of self-worth from productivity and stoicism, often have no framework for who we are once those changes take place. And the third point that I want to highlight is the compounding effect of generational pressure. We are simultaneously the most financially squeezed and the most caregiving burdened generation. We are the most professionally pressured generation currently alive. We're propping up adult children in many cases, and at the same time we're caring for aging parents. We are navigating economic uncertainty as the world around us changes, and we continue to do all of that whilst we pretend that everything feels fine. And so that quiet crisis isn't one thing, it's a narrative that has come to dominate Generation X and our mental health. And if it gets mentioned at all, it's framed as resilience. We coped, we survived, we're the tough generation. And yes, there is truth in that, but resilience is only a tool so far. And when it becomes the only tool that we have available, it becomes a trap rather than a tool. Because what looks like coping from the outside is actually chronic suppression. And chronic suppression has a cost. It shows up as that low-level anxiety that never goes away, that wakes you up in the morning early with that feeling of dread that you can't quite put your finger on. The sense of flatness, the irritability that you never had before, the feeling of going through the motions because nothing quite makes sense, that specific worry that everything is wrong, but it's a vague worry, so we don't know specifically what's wrong. And these aren't character flaws. They're not signs of weakness. They are predictable physiological and psychological consequences of decades of emotional baggage and emotional burden that's had nowhere to go. And here's the thing that genuinely changes for my clients. Your brain doesn't distinguish between the past and the present. So when you've spent so many of your formative years in an environment of instability, emotional, financial, otherwise, your nervous system learns to stay alert, even when we're safe. So even when by every external measure life is good, we're still feeling that panic inside. And that background alertness, that low hum, isn't irrational. It was a sensible adaptation. The problem is that adaptation is still running decades after the original threat has passed. We cannot just think our way out of this. We can't use positive affirmations in the morning because willpower just doesn't work like that. And it also doesn't work because this is not happening in the thinking part of our brain. It's happening at a much deeper level. And these are levels where clinical hypnotherapy works. It works directly with your subconscious. So what can we actually do about it? Well, here are 3 things that you can do actually starting today. So number 1 is to name it. We say name it to tame it. So there's a well-established principle from neuroscience where we know that labeling an emotions or labeling an emotional state reduces its intensity. So when you become aware of that low hum, that feeling of dread or unease, instead of just pushing yourself through or trying to distract yourself with the glass of wine or the extra hours in the office, actually name what you're feeling. Don't be vague about it. Don't say, I'm feeling fine or I'm feeling stressed. give it something specific. Say, I notice that I'm feeling restless. I notice that I'm feeling uneasy. That sheer act of naming it engages our prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain. And that allows us to create a small but real interruption in that automatic threat response. It won't fix it immediately, but it's the start of a process of bringing that unconscious feeling into our conscious awareness. And that's when we can start to work with it. So the second tip that I'll give you is to audit your coping strategies. So I often ask my clients to make a simple list. On one side, list the things that you do when you're struggling that genuinely help. And on the other side, things that you do to manage the feeling in the short term, but often make it worse in the long term. So most of my clients end up with a lot of coping strategies that are firmly in the second column. They turn to alcohol, they overwork, they get into doom scrolling, they push through, they over-exercise, or they don't exercise at all. And although none of these are wrong, because they work in the minute or in the moment, they also don't address the underlying problem, and they don't address it where it's being caused. So we manage it and we don't process it. And the question isn't whether you're coping, it's whether your coping strategies are moving you towards a resolution, or whether they're just maintaining a sustainable level of suppression. So the dread never really goes away, it only gets temporarily relieved. And be honest with yourself when you do this. If nothing else, one thing that is great about Gen X is we can take honesty. The third tip that I give you is start a conversation with your nervous system. And this is where clinical hypnotherapy, CBT, and other forms of talk therapy can be really, really powerful, because it's not magic. It's not some kind of mystical intervention. This is a structured way of communicating with that part of your mind that holds on to those patterns, those old adaptations, the unprocessed emotions and situations, and it starts to update them. So our nervous systems respond to repetition, to safety, and also to new experience, because hypnotherapy creates the conditions for all three. So you don't have to relive painful experiences, but you can revisit them from a position of safety, from where you are now, with all of the resources that you have as an adult, and you begin to change the meaning that you attach to those events, to those feelings within your nervous system. And your nervous system responds, and it responds by quieting down the low hum, because it realizes that the threat is not really a threat anymore. The past hasn't changed, but your relationship and the way you look at the past has, and that's critical. So remember this, if nothing else from this video. You weren't failed by weakness. You were failed by a culture that told you that feelings were inconvenient, that self-sufficiency was the highest virtue, and that asking for help meant you hadn't tried hard enough. You internalized that message. We all internalized that message, and you ran with it. That became your coping mechanism, and you've been running with it ever since. And midlife is the point where the running slows down enough for the truth to catch up. Your kids need you less. Your career has peaked or stalled or hollowed out. Your parents are getting older. And in those gaps that used to fill your life with so much, the quiet moments suddenly start to talk loudly, and you hear something that you've successfully not been listening to and not hearing for the last 20 to 30 years. And that's not a breakdown. That's an invitation to start being real with yourself and to become the real you, because the research is clear. All of that midlife difficulty that we've carried with us is also a midlife opportunity for psychological change and emotional change and potential realization. So we can begin to change and become even bigger and better people in our 40s and 50s, precisely because of what we lived through in the past. And we begin to integrate that into who we are now. and we use those lessons to learn. And we can learn that the quiet crisis doesn't have to stay quiet, and it doesn't have to stay a crisis. So if this video has put into words something that you've been feeling, then great. I'm glad. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. Drop a comment below, even if it's just a yes, this is me. You'd be surprised how much it helps other people to realize that they're not alone in this, and they're not the only one. There's a link in the description to my Gen X Anxiety Reset Pack. It's completely free, and when you're ready to go deeper, if you actually want to explore this further, then the link to my calendar is in the link as well. You can book a discovery call, and there's no pressure. It's just a conversation. I want to make sure that I can help you, but I also want to make sure that you feel comfortable about working with me. And if you know someone else, a friend, a sibling, a partner, a colleague, who's also been quietly struggling for a while and not saying anything about it, but you know them well enough to know that they are struggling, then share this with them.